Yeah, you can see that. You can see this shit pop up. I can see it pop up in the program where it's like you ask people to call you every day or something, like a sponsee or something like this, yeah. Ask to call them, you ask them to call you every day and they don't. And then you ask them why. Well, the mind is like super anxious, or it's like a trauma response or something, yeah. This is how the head claims shit and claims it's arising to you. So you ask people to call you or check in every day. Quite a simple task, really. And they don't. And then, well, why? Well, the mind is busy. I'm confused. I don't know. I'm really distracted. Or it's like my past trauma has me responding this way. The thing is that trauma or that anxiety is arising to something. And we're listening to it, essentially. We get caught listening to it. But its arising gets claimed by the head. And it's the ownership that ends up killing us. It's not the arising. You see, it's not the thoughts or the feelings or the sensations or even the nervous system's response from past shit that's gone on. It's our ownership of it that binds us to it. Yeah, it's the ownership. It's not this non-duality message. And also the message of 12-step recovery, in my opinion, is not about changing that stuff that's arising. It's about losing faith in it by seeing that those manifestations of self that are arising are not manifestations of us. They're manifestations of self. Yeah, because for something to arise, like a thought or a nervous system response, it doesn't have any gas until I give it all the gas. You see? It doesn't have a gas pedal to step on. I step on the gas pedal by listening to that and taking it to be me. This is the thing. This is why the ownership binds us to what's arising. Because it's not what's arising. That has no power until it's listened to. And then what I am gives it all the power. What you are gives it the power. You see? So if there's an idea or a thought, oh, I should drink, that thought is powerless until it's given power by my ownership of it. Because when the thought arises, the brain has an action where it claims that thought. And if I'm taking myself to be that claiming, I'm bound to that thought. Do you see? So if somebody in the program says something like that, where it's not that what's arising isn't appearing, it's that our ownership is binding us to what's arising and essentially controlling our lives, to the point where a lot of people, you have to question who's living that life. Is it them, or is it the patterns that are arising that they're claiming to be the owner of? You see? Because a lot of times I feel like we're born, a whole life happens and we didn't live any of it. It was lived by old patterns. It was lived by the past, essentially. And for many people, like those in recovery, it gets super uncomfortable and they want out of that. So they turn to drugs or booze or whatever, because what's arising, whether it be trauma or random thoughts or anxiety or depression, is being constantly taken to be I'm depressed. You see? It's the I. It's the ownership of what's coming up. And non-duality is going straight to that ownership. Inquiry is inquiring to who is that and is it there? Because when you look behind those movements and when you negate those movements, there's space. Yeah? There's no like a little J inside the body who owns all that shit. It's like a bunch of action is happening to nothing. To just awareness, open space. Yeah, you're not space, but it feels like space. They would say it's the Tibetan texts. Or I think in Zen they say that shit too. But the point of this is that it's the ownership, the I, that bonds us to what's arising. Because thoughts are no problem, but if they're my thoughts, they seemingly become a problem. And I need to switch them. You see? a car is just a car, but if it's my car and it breaks down, now there's all kinds of stress for me, the me that I'm not. It's that binding. Because in a lot of program meetings, I see like people are speaking about the manifestations of self as their manifestations, and it's that exact ownership that has them bound to those manifestations. And those are the same manifestations that made them drink and use in the first place. So they're not drinking and using, but they're still completely bound to the manifestations of self, and it's still running them around. They're not drinking and using, but the discomfort and the resentments are flying. And it's the my that has us attached to that. Because self, the feeling of being this individual, independent thing, character is arising and appearing constantly. There's all this contact happening, whether it be seeing, tasting, touching, smelling, feeling, or thinking. The head is claiming that and claiming that it's arising to you. An inquiry and non-duality is investigating that you. 12-step recovery is investigating the manifestations of self and how it's controlled your life. You see the wording? Manifestations of self and how it's controlled your life. Self, you. Not one thing. Yeah? Self is arising. It's getting claimed to be you. And it's binding you to it. The seemingly you that you're not. But that's the inquiry side. But the main point is that ownership is the my, it's the I. Who is all this shit arising to? Who owns all this? Now, is there a hub in the center of the wheel, or is that also something that's arising as an idea? Because that really alters your perspective on what's happening in any given moment. Because a lot of shit is arising all the time. The senses, the mind, the body, all of this stuff is appearing, but to who? You see? The one that says it's arising to me, it's inquiring into that me. As Ramana would say, where is that me inside your body? Because if that me is not a thing inside your body, that changes your relationship a lot with what's arising. Traumatic response, thoughts, feelings, emotions. It changes us a lot. How? Because you're not the one who owns it. There's no one in the center of the whole thing who owns all of it. Which means there's no one in the center of it who's doing any of it. And there's another big drop. Because a lot of people that I know of us in recovery are bound only to the past things that we seemingly did or did not do. But when I was getting super depressed, it was fucking obvious that I wasn't doing that. That something was taking over the system and doing for me what I wouldn't do for myself. I think that's the experience of a lot of people in addiction recovery. Yeah, so we need to investigate what the hell's going on there. All that crazy shit that I did I do that? Or was that being done through this brain and this body? This brain directing this body, so this brain. Because my experience is that shit was being done through, not by. And that lifts a lot of weight. But when it comes to depression and anxiety, what it really lifts is the reaction to the ownership of when that shit arises. Because then depression moves through, not even depression, but the seeds of depression, thought or feeling, move through really fast. Yeah, but if I'm taking ownership of them and I'm giving them a ton of life and faith, that shit will last for years. And it will get super dark. And I will eventually think that there's no way out of that except to kill the body. And we see that too much. So when investigating, it's investigating an inquiry through non-duality or Advaita, or even the phrases in Zen or whatever. It's investigating the ownership of what's arising. It's not investigating what's arising. Because what's arising will constantly keep changing and will constantly keep arising in different ways with different faces. And in my experience, there's way too much and it's moving too fast for me to catch. But you go right to the core of it. Who is it arising to? Who's the me? Is there a me? Is there an I in the center? Because once that's seen through, that grip releases on all of that content. And then the experience changes a lot. Does the content still arise? Yes. In my experience, it does. It does quiet down, and it changes because the relationship of giving it life changes. But old patterns might still arise. Like that fact of not being the doer, of not being the one who owns or who is initiating all of this thought, for example. That fact would then support the other fact that if you're not doing it, is it really going to change that much, or is it going to keep doing? In my experience, it keeps doing. It's like mental patterns keep happening. It's just that when there's not a claiming or a grabbing onto them as the owner of them, they dissipate fast. They're like clouds moving through the sky, right? Rather than a tree growing, which lasts fucking years, like resentments. So this is why the beauty of non-duality goes right to the center. Who is it arising to? Is what you're taking yourself to be, which is the contents that's arising, is that actually arising to you? Is there a you in the center of that? Because like we were saying, if it's not arising to you, then you're reacting to a bunch of shit, and what's coming through you is living your life. And that stuff is from the past. So you're reacting to today as a past character, let's say. Yeah. Which really begs the question, are you living your life, or are these patterns living your life? And for a lot of us, those patterns make things uncomfortable, because one of the reasons in my experience is that they don't actually really make that much sense. Like, I want to feel wanted, but my reactions to things reify an idea that I'm unworthy, which was like established when I was a kid. I always felt like unworthy. Yeah, so even now, if I want to feel wanted, there's like this background fucking thing of like, oh, I should deny this thing that will make me feel wanted because there's something in the system that wants to feel unworthy. It's a game. It's like the head doesn't know the goals. It doesn't, like, its goals are all fucked up. I want to feel wanted, but I also want to make sure that I still feel unworthy. And somehow I have to balance these two. And then we wonder why, if we're living as that random fucking play, duality, why we're anxious all the time. Yeah? Because there's a goal, and then there's something stopping the goal, and we're taking both of those to be ourself, which is like a wicked example of duality. Non-duality, meaning you're not that. Non-two. So you can just negate that shit right away. But if you're living as it, it's super uncomfortable because it's manifesting all these different ways. Like in the Big Book of AA, they say it manifests 100 different ways. Now the word that really sticks out in the Big Book when it comes to individuality is self. In the 12 steps. Self-reliance has failed us. Self-knowledge avails us nothing. Self-pity, self-centeredness, self-seeking are what has defeated us. All of these actions or movements of self, they are manifestations of self. You see, how does self arise? Through the thinking. It's by removing our confidence in self that we recover. What would that mean? Confidence, let's say, you could also say, is belief in something that's going to be positive or reliable for us. Yeah. So if we're going to recover, we have to lose confidence, belief, or reliance in self, which manifests as how? In our thinking. How are we going to lose faith in our thinking? Is seeing that we're not the one doing or who owns the thinking. And starts with alcoholic or drug addict thoughts. Yeah, and in my experience, it moves to all thoughts. Because that shit's firing whether I'm asking it to or not. But it's going back to the ownership of who owns it. Because I see a lot of people still getting controlled by those patterns. You know? It's like a nervous system response happens, and then they say, oh, well, that's like a traumatic response. Sure, but you're not that response because it's arising to something. Something knows the nervous system response. It's seeing it. It's knowing it happened before it. Because nervous system responses happen in time. Even if they're super fast, they're happening in time. Yeah? You are not in time. You are before. You are the ever-present now awareness. So there's something which is knowing the arising of what's happening. But when that arises, the head claims it. If you're taking yourself to be that event, then essentially we're living life from old nervous system responses. This is the beauty of non-duality goes to the center of it, which I feel is very effective because addiction recovery is not, a lot of us don't have a lot of time to mess with psychological patterns. You know, by the time I was walking into an AA room, it was like I was really suicidal and things were really, really shaky. You know? And I think that's the power of right away you're powerless over this shit. So you got to give up the reins, because if you're still trying to control it, it's not you who's trying to control it, it's self. And the program knows that. So right away they're going, you're powerless, because the program knows that you're running on self's schedule, and self is fucking not reliable. Yeah. So it's powerless, it's higher power, and it's right away stop all of the things that are firing up the depression or the alcohol, the people, places, and things. Yeah. But when it comes down to it, it's the ownership of what's arising. That would be the root cause of the anxiety and the discomfort, irritability, restlessness, discontent. In my experience. Because fucking with the contents of thought and ideas, sensations, and all these things, it's hard to get to the bottom because it's ever changing and it's always running this dualistic thing of back and forth. Yeah. Sometimes, though, I feel the head is so loud with all of these old patterns that those need to be worked on, like in order to sit back into what you are, because the head is so loud. But from the recovery point of view, the 12 steps do that cleaning up of the personal life, of the individual. You know, if the 12 steps really do kind of like put a lot of shit in order and make a lot of sense for the action figure, which calms down the head and calms down the life. So then you can really start to look at, am I the doer? Who is this arising to? When shit is too wild, there's like too much anxiety, too much depression or something, those things need to be looked at first. But I'm talking in reference to the 12 steps here. And the step work does that. It does a lot of that heavy lifting as far as the individual goes. And it works on you, which is the beauty of it, you know? But from Advaita or inquiry or non-duality point of view, it's looking at who it's arising to. Who it's arising to. because that is really the idea, the me-ness of everything, yeah, which the ownership and the discomfort and the irritability revolves around. It revolves around this illusory hub called me. And there's a lot of weight put into life by the claiming of what's arising. So it's going right to the center.